I'm with Gottlieb, who is a virtual DPO. Now, Carl, you do a lot of work with US companies. So what do you see as the key differences between UK and US organizations?
I would say that the US has a higher tolerance to risk. It's probably a big one. And they're also influenced by a lot wider regulation. Most companies that are UK based are only really thinking about the GDPR and Data Protection Act, maybe some global regulations, whereas in the US they're thinking about state-by-state regulations, they're thinking about things that are changing, CCPA, they're thinking about regulations in every single country. And the problem for US organizations is those rules are vastly different. You know, if you compare what COPPA is in the US for children compared to what the GDPR is doing, it's confusing, it's complicated. And the lack of enforcement that's going to be going on from, let's say, the ICO to American organizations, i.e. none, is making them more risk tolerant.
Okay. And say if you're a US organization who wants to comply with everything and you want to do the right thing, how do you do that?
Well, I guess the first point is there's probably not many of them. But there are some, and it's great working with those kind of companies where they recognize the true value of privacy or privacy, as I end up having to pronounce it when I'm working with them all day. But we just have to do a lot more work. We have to really invest the time into looking at what regulations apply where, what we need to comply with, what our users care about, and whether we should go with like a single kind of centralized model of privacy management, or whether we should look at delegating that out globally. Should we comply with the highest bar and maintain that everywhere? Now that is the easiest way to go, and GDPR provides that high bar. Now it was the high bar, but now that's started to change. And we've got things like the UK ICO's age-appropriate design code, which is starting to really push that bar a little bit up. The CCPA in California, that's starting to push the bar up a little bit even further. And when you combine that with other regulations like COPPA, HIPAA, even PCI DSS when it comes to the security side, it can be a real challenge. So we just have to invest more time, more effort, more diligence into it. But it helps when you've got that business backing to say, Carl, we value this, let's go and do it.
Now you said there aren't many of them, so yeah. Do you think there are US companies that should be worried? Do you think we're going to go after them, or?
Well, yeah, it's a great question. It's really difficult for anyone in Europe to do anything about it. And a great case was the ICO when they supposedly wrote a letter to the Washington Post saying, we don't like what you're doing with having a cookie wall on your website, but basically saying, accept behavioral ads or pay. And the ICO said, yeah, we're not happy about that. So they wrote them, we did what the British should do and wrote them a strongly worded letter, which kind of disappeared somewhere across the Atlantic. And that was kind of problematic. One thing, because the ICO said, well, we can't do anything more. We can't enforce against them. And even worse was the Austrian DPA and also the Dutch DPA recently have gone against the ICO and said, we support the concept of a cookie wall if there's an alternative way you can pay. So we're seeing inconsistencies going on there. So being able to enforce anything on the other side of the Atlantic is kind of not going to happen. So again, for many organizations are thinking, why bother? And what we do see though is that certain organizations that are influenced in different directions, let's say they've got a good legal team internally or really strong brand focus, they're thinking, well, privacy is the right thing to do. We want to be a moral authority, so let's go for it and really invest.
Now we do see a lot of US companies that come and launch in the UK and in Europe in general. It's obviously a great market for them to expand into. So do those companies pay a little more attention?
Yeah, absolutely. The organizations that really want the UK market, they really want the mindset, especially Central Europe. Now UK is similar to the US in that most Brits don't really care about privacy or data protection too much, or you have any awareness of it. Germany very different, France very different, Northern Europe very, very different. So again, for those companies, they're thinking, well, if the focus is really there, I should really comply. The big problem for these companies is if no one's really enforcing on the kind of mid-tier of size of organizations, then why bother? If you look at the big fines and enforcement that's come out recently over the last year with GDPR, Google, ad organizations, Facebook, yeah, it's a sexy thing to go after. If you're a privacy activist, hey, we've got Max Schrems here today. He's going after Facebook. He's not going after small 100 employee tech companies, because why bother? Mm-hmm. If you're a privacy activist and you want to make your name in your career, who do you go after? I know, it's about ego. Let's be honest. If you're a privacy activist, you go where the big... Yeah, and money. You're absolutely right. Go where the big things are. And the same if you work for a regulator. You want to go where the big action is. You don't go after small people. But if you work for the small people, which is like 99% of us out there, employees, you're kind of safe.
So the law is coming in California. There's rumours of, a desire for a federal law even. Do you think we'll see that at all?
No.
No? That was simple.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the amazing thing about the US is that it really is 50 countries or 50 states just pieced together. I mean, we think we've got a number of states in the UK pieced together, but the US is vastly different. You've seen that on recent things like abortion law. East and West Coast versus the South is a completely different world. And so you've got the concept of federal laws already and state laws, but they're so different. Trying to get state laws passed is a nightmare. CCPA has been a nightmare to even get anywhere close to how it should be. So try and do that in 50 places, all sort of preempted by this one kind of federal law. I just can't see it ever happening. You've got the divided political side of the US. And ultimately, these laws only pass if you've got politics involved. You've got politicians that recognize the people will vote for you if they pass a law. If no one in the US really cares about privacy, then why bother? No politician's going to get elected on the back of a federal law.
And I think what we saw with the interviews of Mark Zuckerberg is, do they even understand it?
Exactly. They're comparing Facebook to Twitter, to Google, as if that somehow matters, rather than whether it really matters to the general public. The other issue in the US has always been this concept of harm. If it doesn't give you real harm to the individual, then we can't do anything about it. And that's starting to change with things like CCPA. But a big thing there was an amendment tried to be passed that said any individual can sue a company if they breach the CCPA in any place. And that failed to pass completely, that amendment. So we're now stuck with the idea that the Attorney General's office is the only one that can prosecute a company for general compliance failures. And recently the Attorney General's office has said they only believe they can prosecute 3 cases per year. Imagine if the ICO said that, 3 cases per year. California is much bigger than the UK. It's one of the biggest economies in the world, that state. So forget the ICO, forget the UK. And the Attorney General's office has nothing the size of the ICO.
So if you're looking ahead to the coming 12 months, what do you think we're going to see? Do you think we're going to see any changes?
The biggest change I foresee is the ICO's age-appropriate design code starting to do its magic. And I kind of see it as a Trojan horse. If you look at what it says that the GDPR asks for privacy by default and by design. But everyone's kind of said, what does that even mean? Well, it's a bit woolly. Oh yeah, we're doing it. It's fine. Right, we're ticked. We've done privacy by default. Fantastic. But no one really is. And the age-appropriate design code says, if you've got a website which children are likely to go to, which is most, let's say the BBC, then hey, you've got to turn every setting to the high privacy settings. So no behavioral ads, no Google Analytics, nothing personalized at all. Now that's great, but it also says that applies to all children that come to your website, and anyone that comes to your website that you can't verify as an adult, you've got to treat as a child. So what they're saying is you have to have robust verification to see if someone is an adult, proof of ID, credit card numbers. Nobody's going to want to deploy that friction of asking you, are you an adult? In which case, the UK is kind of saying, you've got to turn all this stuff on. And that's quite scary for any web designer, because they're saying, well, GDPR sort of said it, but I got away with it. And the ICO is saying now, you've got to do it. And if you don't, you're breaking the child code. And that's quite scary for many people. Exactly.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's been really informative. Thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you.